You can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.
Hello, and greetings out there in podcast and YouTube land. You have landed upon the Johnny Has the Keys, a little podcast where two gentlemen get together. We discuss horror and science fiction, movies, television, literature, key influences on those films, and things that they in turn have influenced. We've been doing it for about 4 seasons now, which has been great. My name is David. I'm here with my good friend Tim. If you are joining us for the first time, we're glad you're here. Glad you found us. Please take the time to do that typical stuff. Subscribe so you find out about us later on. Ring the bell. Give us a positive review. The better the review you give us, or even giving us a mild review that's nice, helps us maintain the website, maintain microphones, and maintain our sanity. If you are joining us again, thank you. Welcome back. We would love to hear more from you. Let us know what your thoughts are, what you think, what you like, what you don't like. Tim is in a castle.
I'm moving my microphone.
Moving a microphone.
I was trying to center it a little more. There we go.
Like I said, my name is David. I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Tim. Tim, what have you been up to?
Oh, my gosh. What have I not been up to?
Well,
I'm very happy that we're in the world of horror.
Yes, we are.
Because last week, I believe we were in the world of sci-fi that I liked and you did not.
Yes.
With Little Miss Lucy. But as far as things I have been doing, I have been delving into the vault of one of my favorite guys. He's not reliable, but he's good, sometimes very good, and often not good at all. And that would be Mr. John Carpenter.
Oh, okay. I was not expecting that, because I would always think Carpenter is good. I mean, he's had some misses.
Ooh,
but
he's had some stinkers.
Yeah, but I think that's because he was just kind of devoid of ideas for it. You know, yeah. I mean, Carpenter really hit really hard. His first 4 movies, you're like, okay, this guy rocks.
I would agree, and I would say that the first one in this picture behind me, The Fog, is definitely a favorite. I mean, it has some flaws, but it's a lot of fun. You know, and of course he did The Thing and Halloween. The Thing came after this, and I think Halloween was before, as well as, you know, and I love Big Trouble in Little China and Escape from New York and some of those Kurt Russell ones. But then you
Assault on Precinct 13. I like that one too.
I did too. But then you start getting into the latter years, especially the 90s and 2000s, when you did vampires and Ghosts of Mars and Mouth of Madness is okay. As a matter of fact, I would classify the Mouth of Madness in the same category as the one behind me, Prince of Darkness, which I know you don't like this movie.
Yeah.
I still like this movie. It's got some kind of high concept ideas behind it.
Philosophical horror and evil.
Well, I found out that it's a part of what he considers his Apocalypse trilogy, which began with The Thing. The middle part was this, and then the last part was The Mouth of Madness with Sam Neill. I know.
Okay.
I know. Very strange.
I don't see that as a trilogy, but hey, you know.
I don't either, but if you Google it, it comes up. It's very strange.
Okay. All right.
But Prince of Darkness, well, first of all, The Fog is a wonderful movie. It's got Jamie Lee Curtis. It's got Janet Leigh, her mother, in it, Adrienne Barbeau, Tom Atkins, Hal Holbrook. I mean, killer cast. Killer ghost story movie that we've often said, hey, we should probably do this for the podcast.
We should. We definitely should. I like The Fog.
It's actually been remade too. I can't remember the remake very well because I only saw it once. But
right.
But Prince of Darkness has some things going for it too. It has some cheesy actors in it, including the blonde guy from Simon and Simon, who is the lead.
Matthew McCormick, wasn't that his name?
Something like that. It's
Something
not Joe
like that.
McCraney. It's the other one.
Yeah, it's the other one.
But it also has, Mr. Donald Pleasance in it, which is fabulous. It's got Alice Cooper in it, which I love. He just kept popping by the set to see what was going on. And John just finally said, "You want to be in it?" And he said, "Yeah." So they put him in it and he did a song for it. And then I don't know. It's just it's one of those movies where evil is foreboding, it's coming, it's ever present. We're locking ourselves in a building, it's outside. It's just those, I don't know, it's like catnip to me. I just gravitate to those. So I still kind of like it. I do seem to remember
the atmosphere was very ominous and dark. Isn't it a church? Don't they lock themselves in a church?
They do.
The gag. And they've unleashed the ultimate evil in a tube.
It's in a big canister of swirling green liquid. Yeah, it's
sure
great.
It is. Okay.
Yeah, so they found this big swirling vat of evil Antichrist liquids underneath this church in Harlem or something. I can't remember. But it's great. I'm telling you, it's a mood piece. So that's what I've been doing. I've been dipping back into the familiar waters of John Carpenter because, when you can't find what you want out there, go back to something you remember. So
yes,
there you go.
Yeah, well, see, and I was thinking it's ironic. Again, we're kind of diverge, but I'm on the same frequency. I was, as usual, delving back into science fiction realm, and I wanted to revisit Star Trek, but we're doing that on original Star Trek, but we're doing that on the sister podcast. So I don't want to taint watching them. I want to watch them fresh again when we do them for the podcast.
Me too.
But so I thought, okay, what's my only other recourse Star Trek wise? So I said, oh, well, I hate Discovery and I haven't caught up on it. So I'll catch up on Discovery and realize that really I hate it even more. It is, I want to challenge anybody out there who likes Star Trek Discovery, especially this last season, to tell me why you would ever like this. It is absolutely terrible storytelling. And it is just horrible. I mean, it's got some, I do commend it, and I think I've mentioned this on a former podcast. Some of the actors in this series are really strong, but they are having to say the worst lines and the most terrible situational emotions. It's horrible. It is just so bad. And I would love to get your take on it just from a writer's perspective, because you are a writer, and because part of writing is your heroes have to change. Your characters have to motivate or move, or you can have a villain who's a villain all the way through, but he's going to be a fairly rote villain unless he has his own little things he's overcoming, battles with the protagonist or situational things that come up that he has to adjust his evil plan or whatever. But if he's just straight evil and that's what he does, and he's just a relentless evil or the bad guy, who cares? He's not an interesting villain. He's just a villain. Same thing with your heroes. If they stay this one note all the way through a freaking season or all the way through a series even, I'm kind of lose interest in that character. Even back when we liked our classic Star Trek, and it was episodic. So we weren't telling season arcs. We weren't even telling really character arcs, really. But these characters were reacting to these situations, and they may have learned something from it. The one where McCoy falls in love and gets married, City on the Edge of Forever. Kirk has to go through this horrible emotional distress, and we feel for him. Now, next week, he's just going to be jumping into the next alien bed. But for that episode, that was a concise, cool story that told a great arc and great character work and everything else. Discovery is season-long arcs, and they can't manage to do that in 16, 12, 14 episodes. These characters are the same at the first scene as they are in the last scene. And it's not good. There's no character growth. There's no learning. It's just.
There needs to be flaws, for sure. I mean, yeah, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy all had flaws. Kirk's was ego. Spock's was kind of ego. It was a suppressed ego.
Yeah.
And McCoy's was just, he was just, I don't know.
Well, we've talked about on the podcast, on the sister podcast, what makes Spock, I think what made him the favorite character for fans and everything else was he always had that inner turmoil. He was always fighting himself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What made them as a trio work was Gene Coon and Roddenberry's writing of the three of them, that conflict that they had, constantly kind of insulting each other, but still caring about each other.
So this woman on Discovery that Shaniqua plays, does she not have a camaraderie with anybody on her helm?
No, she has now been, spoiler alert, but she has now been promoted to captain. The unique thing about Discovery was it was going to be the first series.
Oh, I thought she was captain. I didn't. No. I've never seen it. Okay.
The unique thing about Discovery is it was going to be the first officer. We were going to follow the first officer rather than the captain, and that would make it a cool, unique story, and something different in Star Trek series mythos. But by season 4, no, we make her the captain. So now she's the captain, and she has to be the decision maker in every decision of every plot. Even when they meet the president of the Federation, the president of the Federation says, "What do you think, Captain Burnham?" And she's the one that gives the big speech. And this happens repeatedly over and over again. They'll meet, she goes on all of the away team missions. She goes on every conflict. She has to make the decision about everything. And it's like, it's the Michael Burnham show. And she always makes the right decision, except she also always cries because, Sonequa is really good at crying. So it's in every episode. She tears up and has a moment.
She only did that a couple times on Walking Dead.
Right. Well, they learned that she likes to do it, so she's doing it all the time.
She is good at it. I mean, she's just good, but she can't
it's also
any better than what's written for her.
It's also a very, and I may get in trouble, so to speak, but let me know, help educate me. It's a very agendized show, in my opinion. They have a definite, very woke culture, very agendaed moment. For example, you'll have a Starfleet Commodore, let's say, and the captain, and they're having a meeting in the ready room. Right at the perfect opportune moment, an ensign and somebody who's not even in Starfleet just walk in saying, "We have something to add to this conversation." And they start talking about their own personal gender non-bias in relation to this topic. And it's like, okay, first of all, where did all the Starfleet protocol go? Because you guys just kind of walk into the captain's ready room whenever you want to and just start spousing, we have this intense emotional story we want to tell you. No. And if it had worked for the story, I would have bought it, but it didn't. It worked because we need to say right here that non-binary people are important. And that was the box that they were checking off in that scene. And that's just one scene. It's repeated scene after scene after scene of that.
That stuff should never be the forefront. It should be an afterthought. That way it resonates more because it's not shoved in your face. It's like, you know what I'm saying? I mean,
I do. It's what made Star Trek Star Trek.
It's
what
preachy. It's didactic if you don't do it as an afterthought. And afterthought may be the wrong word, but what I'm saying is you have the forefront and the background, and usually that kind of stuff falls in the background because it's already a part of their culture.
Well, what made Uhura an aspirational character was she didn't have to say, "Hi, I am an empowered woman in a male-dominated world."
Right. Right.
In Discovery, they say that, and then they'll say it every episode, and then they'll say it, two scenes out of one episode, and they keep belaboring it. And it's several points like that. There's a lot of empowerment in this series, except for people that should be empowered.
Right. Well, and they also, like with Uhura, they had a black woman on the helm, which was huge at the time. But then you also had Spock, who was a mixed breed alien, which also worked towards the whole racism issue.
Yes.
So, I mean, that was present within him too, but still.
Sulu, Chekhov.
Right, Sulu too. All of that stuff. Yeah, I see what you're saying. It sounds like they're didactic, and I hate that word, but I keep using it.
The thing I don't like about Kurtzman, and I've said it before, and I've definitely said it when we've done our Star Trek podcast, is he should not be leading the Star Trek front right now, which he is. And it is totally, in my opinion, destroying the canon of Star Trek in a lot of ways. First of all, it's overkill. We now have like 5 series running simultaneously of Star Trek on Paramount.
Soon to be Star Wars too.
And it can get too much, especially if you're not telling good stories. Basically, the whole thing is tell a good story. That's the point. Have great characters, that adds to it, but definitely tell a good story. But like we've said, I think this whole binging has led to non-episodic story arc television writing that is lazy. To me, it's a lot easier to write a one story and stretch it out to 15 episodes than it is to have to tell a concise story, beginning, middle, and end, twist, turn characters every week. That's hard, and you have to have a good writers to do that. And instead, they have crappy writers who just say, "Okay, here's our threat for the season, and we're going to extend it for 10 episodes." And we're going to throw in every now and then it'll be another culture, but basically we're solving this 10 episode puzzle.
All I can think is that it's Paramount Plus. They want you to subscribe, and they're just basically using the adoration of Star Trek nerds to support their platform.
Oh yeah. They've got Prodigy, which is an animated Star Trek, almost pseudo comedy. They've got Lower Decks, which is an animated. It's Farscape. It's what's the animated cartoon science fiction done by the same guy that did The Simpsons, Matt Groening?
Futurama.
It's Futurama with Star Trek characters. That's what Lower Decks is. They've got Picard. They've got Discovery. They're getting ready to do another series with just 7 of 9 from Picard. So it's...
Well, Shudder and Netflix, we would love to have you as sponsors, since Paramount Plus will never ask us.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, I watch all things Drag Race, but even Rue has got some stuff on Paramount Plus that I can't see now unless I subscribe, and I'm not gonna. So. Right.
But you subscribe to Shudder, and Shudder's actually good. It's like I said last
Shudder
week.
is predominantly movies, but
Yeah.
they do have series, and they do have a lot of documentaries. And as a matter of fact, I've got one I also just watched recently that I'll probably talk about next week. So,
all right. Well, horror world's much better than sci-fi world.
I'm
right
so
now.
sorry.
No,
That's why there's not a sci-fi channel.
that's why nobody can do it right. That's right. Yeah.
Well, they'd have to get the movies like Shudder did. But speaking of horror, old and not necessarily new, we are in a double episode. We are in a double feature episode, so we probably shouldn't have rambled on so long in our
We're in a double feature
spot. Yeah,
because this week and next week we're doubled.
But now that I think about it, both of these are short films, so maybe we won't talk as much about them.
Yeah.
We are venturing into the land, finally, you may say. It is our 4th season of Transylvania. and a certain Count Dracula. And we are doing a double feature this week. And I'll go ahead and spoil it next week, too.
Yes.
We're covering 4 Dracula movies, and we're going to do them chronologically, starting with this week, Todd Browning's 1931 iconic, somewhat masterpiece, I guess you would say, considering how iconic it is, and 1958's Horror of Dracula, which is the Hammer version that introduced us to Christopher Lee's fang-bearing, sexual, bloody Count. Both iconic in my book, wouldn't you say?
Yes, very.
Yeah.
Yeah, and definitely in my experience with them, personal experience, yes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when I was a kid, I dressed up like Dracula for Halloween. I had the widow's peak and the white face and the cape and the necklace, and I talked like this. And that is, Bela Lugosi all over. I watched these movies on Shock Theater late Friday nights on what was Channel 17 back in the day in Atlanta. I watched them all. I even liked the Abbott and Costello meets Dracula or Wolfman or whatever that followed their popularity. It's weird because we talk about these things like they were new when we were young, when they were actually old when we were young.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, this movie came out in 1931.
Yeah, crazy. When I started thinking about that, I was going, wait, modern times. Charlie Chaplin was 1936. This was before that.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. So, thinking back about it this time, watching it, because I had not seen this movie for quite a long time. I've seen it like you several times when I was growing up, and vampires are to me what zombies are to you. They are my favorite cinematic and literary monster. And I had remembered this differently. Like a lot happens when we watch these older films. I remember this, and then suddenly it's not in it, or I remember that, and it is in it, and I'd forgotten that it was in it. That sort of thing. I had not watched in a long time. One of the things that struck me was this is so iconic. For almost 100 years old film, it still is up there with that silhouette, that shot of the Wolfman or the Creature or Charlie Chaplin or Frankenstein or Marilyn Monroe. We see Lugosi as this character. And for decades, he was Dracula. That was the icon. That's why we, even in the 60s and 70s, still spoke like Lou from Transylvania.
Well,
they're making cereal and Muppets with him.
Right. Oh, that's another one. You keep bringing up these keys. I thought of one while we were talking a while ago, and another one would be Sesame Street.
Yeah.
And you mentioned iconic imagery. I think of shots of him. There's several shots of him that I don't know if they showed them on the reels of something you'd see at the Oscars or not, but I definitely saw them on reels somewhere, like the one where the light's going across his eyes, or the one where he's on the staircase and he's got the one hand up, kind of fey looking, about the creatures of the night. And even the one where he opens the mirror and he spins away. I mean, I always think about those things.
Yep. The one where he's got his hand is below the cross. And he's in the full tux and everything, just the way he looks with that hand in the front, kind of gnarled and everything. You're going, okay, that is such an icon, but his suit is gorgeous. That is the most starch ever in any vest and shirt in history. Yes, it is just perfect, sort of thing.
Yeah. Also, you mentioned this. Well, first of all, briefly, as far as like a synopsis of both of these, they start off kind of like the book. This one starts off with Jonathan Harker as as Renfield as the real estate agent that goes to, instead of Jonathan Harker, to bring Dracula to England, where he is going to buy a place called Carfax Abbey. The second movie is totally, I mean, Hammer took huge liberties once it got along to them and made Jonathan Harker go to Dracula's castle to kill him. I mean, it's like totally different plot element there.
Well, how do we want to treat these? Do we want to look at one each individual or just compare as we go sort of thing?
I think we should probably tackle the first one. Yeah, I kind of was hitting the synopsis because they were so different. But yeah, I think we should stick with the first one.
Yeah, because you said they start out similar to the book. No, not at all. Neither one of them starts out.
Well, and then Dracula, the 1931 version, is more based on the play, which is why a lot of it looks like a play, because a lot of it's set in the same room or the same place.
Yep.
And then, like I said, by the time 1958 came along and there was color and sexuality and blood and fangs, Hammer just said, hey, let's just make this guy go out there to kill him and have a lot of it take place in the castle because the set looks really cool, that kind of stuff. So, but yes, back to the first movie. There's two iconic images for you right there.
Yep, there you go.
One, he's wrapped in the cape completely, and you can just see his face. The other is that lighting shot I mentioned earlier. One of the things you mentioned about this movie that I already knew, because I have seen this movie, I don't know how many times, a lot, is the fact that there is an absence of music in this movie.
Correct.
And a lot of people find it really, really boring. I kind of like it.
I didn't find it. No, I didn't find it boring. However, well, two points on that. I didn't find it boring just because I like the topic and I like watching it and I like Browning and everything. I can see how modern audiences might. But I think lack of music is much better than the Philip Glass version that has bad music to it. And then my last comment on that is I do think it shows people how important music is in suspense and horror.
Yeah, for sure.
And how good music actually would probably elevate this and make it a really, compelling for modern audiences. But that what they have selected in the past has not.
Well, yeah. And what David is talking about out there, for those of you that don't know, I have this, well, there's actually multiple DVD versions, but the 75th anniversary in particular has a Philip Glass score that is predominantly strings. And it's not that it's bad music, it's that it doesn't fit. It's almost like they just said, hey, let's just take this and put it in there. It's, I mean, when something scary happens, there's no drama in the music at all. It's pretty much the same thing over and over again, just some strings. Yeah. And I just was not impressed with it. And I kept going back and forth. I was like, let's watch this quiet. Let's watch this with music. And finally, I just stopped. I was like, no, it's much better the way it was without anything. So
yeah, because there are times when it does lead to anticipation because it is so silent and you're only hearing him move or her scream or whatever sort of thing. But there are other ones where just the pacing, Browning he had not done Frankenstein yet, correct?
He didn't do Frankenstein. That was James Whale.
James Whale. Okay.
He did Freaks, and I believe it was the following year.
The thing that I didn't like in his direction was some of the pacing, timing. And I think it may have just been the time because audiences were used to getting their movies in a little bit slower pace, like whether they were reading the title slides that would come up or the dialogue slides that would come up or whatever. So they were kind of used to it slower. But like a good example is like that shot on your right is when he first comes out of the coffin. And it is like a minute and a half slow zoom up to his face. And we're going, and we're expecting something, and it goes up to his face, and we're going, and then we cut away, and that's it. He doesn't blink, he doesn't look, he never
blinks.
Something. Yeah. But there's no, And there's a lot of that where we're just a hold on like a close up of his face. And we get the reaction shot and then it just keeps going and going and going. And so I think that's why modern audiences might think, oh, it's a little boring. It's a little slow.
Well, and we've also become jaded to elements of horror that were terrifying back then, because right prior to that is the casket lid sliding off and the hand coming out, or the spider coming out, or the really little weird bug coming out of what looks like a little bug coffin. Which I thought was strange, or the little vampire bugs. But yeah, so I mean, a lot of the elements that made this scary. I mean, even back in the 60s when I was a kid, my sister always remarked about him being dead. The thing was, he's dead and he wants to drink your blood. That's the scary thing. And nowadays, that's probably the least scary thing to us about a Dracula film, because we have modern special effects that will turn him into a monster or what have you.
Yes, although there was a lot. I mean, the things from the book they do keep are all of the, the transmutations that he does, turning into things. They'd be off screen sometimes, but yeah. But I've even got in my watch notes, incredible opening shot with the matte painting on the Borga Pass, which is really great. And then I've got, whoa, vampires, coffins, bats, and brides all in the first 5 minutes. This is a killer kickoff. Yeah. And the set, it's a shame they couldn't stay at Dracula's castle, because the set's amazing. Yes. Which was an interesting take that, that they took with the Christopher Lee one, which was they basically stayed around his castle in that area, in that town, that whole thing. It wasn't, we're going, that was but that's an issue with the novel too, we'll get to. But yeah, the art direction by Charles Hall and those sets are great. Love the Dracula sets.
As far as this adaptation being closer to the play, Universal really did want to do a big budget adaptation of the book, and had plans to, but apparently the stock market crashed in 1929 and they didn't have the money. So they ended up having to adapt the play. And they had some struggles with it as well. As a matter of fact, they had to barter with Miss Stoker to get her asking price for the property down. And they actually used Bela Lugosi, or he did it of his own volition, as a negotiator with Stoker, saying, I really, really want to play this part. I've been playing it in the play and they want to make a movie out of it. Could you come down from 80,000 to 40,000 or whatever?
Right.
And that's basically how they got the movie made. So,
yeah. I mean, part of it was, Stoker's novel came out, I guess, the end of the 19th century. It was like 97, 98, I think.
1800. Yeah, 1890s. Yeah.
97 or 98. So 30 years later, they're making this movie version of it. But before that, they had the play, and the play was really popular. And it scared people and scared audiences, although nowadays it still is kind of campy and a little bit straightforward. They had to make changes to the novel to make the play, and those changes carried on in this version, and they changed even a little bit more. But
I'm not familiar with the play. I know we did it at Morristown Theater Guild back in the 70s. I did not see it.
Yeah, it's all set in Seward's Sanitarium. So that's why. And when the play opens, so none of the prologue and first act of the book is in the play. The play is in London at Seward's Sanitarium. Lucy is sick, and Mina is worried about her. And we get to meet this new guy who's just been in town about a week or so, named Count Dracula. And then they call in Van Helsing to look into Lucy, who is sick. She ends up dying. So then by Act 2, we've got the Lucy monster that we're going to have to kill, and we've got Mina now being sick, and Dracula obviously being the antagonist, and Van Helsing and Harker and Seward fighting him off.
My question is, does Renfield play a big part in it?
Renfield is in the play. but not to the extent that he's in later film versions.
Well, I was going to say they bumped him up in this movie to being the lead as far as going to get Dracula in place of Jonathan Harker. And I'm like, is it because they just wanted to show him eating bugs and being crazy at the end? Why did they give him more screen time in this?
Well, one of my big notes in this is Dwight Frye is the best part of this movie. I'm sorry. He is.
Yeah.
The best from the very beginning to the very end. His last scene, all of his scenes are great. They're memorable. They're unique. They're different. And he definitely makes that, so well. But Renfield is in it. The issue they have in any, and I think we're going to talk about it in both these movies and next week's as well. The issue you have in adapting Bram Stoker's novel is it's not really a good novel, really. It's okay, but he intended it more like a scary travelogue to start with. So the novel itself, if you guys haven't read it, please read it. It is a classic and you should have read it by now. But, it's basically a series of diary entries, journals, travelogues, that kind of stuff. And there's no pure protagonist in it. We follow this Harker guy for a good third of the novel, and then suddenly he freaking disappears. And now we're suddenly thrust into meeting Lucy and Mina and all of these suitors that they have, including an American Texan.
A Texas guy is like a cowboy with a gun.
Correct. Harker joins them again, so I guess he's our protagonist, but not really. By then, we're kind of pulling for Van Helsing, who's been introduced.
Harker doesn't Harker get left at Dracula's castle, but somehow escape or something?
Yes, he is left with the brides in the novel. They leave. Dracula basically says, "Peace out, enjoy him for a little while," sort of thing. But he escapes and is in a sanitarium for months before he can finally heal up and come back to London to his fiancée, who Dracula saw the picture of and what goes after, yada, yada. So each of these 4 movies we're going to cover in the next 2 episodes takes elements of the novel, but then kind of skews them to how they want. I think it's pretty cool to have Renfield as the protagonist for us at the beginning rather than Harker, because then it makes sense for what happens at the end at the sanitarium, because in the play and in other versions, Renfield is just this crazy guy who becomes his slave, essentially.
He's like an Igor type character.
And it makes sense that no, he's the guy that tried to persuade you at the beginning, and you took him and made him semi-vampiric because he wants to be a vampire, but not really. So he's a ghoul, essentially. He's his ghoul. He's his, if you want to do the keys, he's the illiterate version of Straker in Salem's Lot.
Okay. Yeah. Well, he's a little more dependent. He wants to be immortal. So he's like bargaining with Dracula to, let him drink the blood of rats or what have you, just don't kill him. Yeah.
And Dracula is using him to do certain things that he can't do during the day or because of, constraints or whatever. So, yes. But I loved Dwight Frye in this. I thought he was awesome. Watching it again, I was just going, yes, he is so good.
Yeah, he is. We'll talk about him in casting, but of course he was in Frankenstein as well. Before we move on to casting, is there anything you want to mention as far as scenes
and production? No, I mean, I think we all remember.
There are no fangs in this movie.
There are no fangs in this movie,
even though
there's no blood in this movie.
Fangs.
There's no blood in this movie. We don't see any bites in this movie either. Not in 31. But the thing that Lugosi did give Dracula is a lot more sex appeal, even though he's not the sexiest in my opinion. But he gave him that elegance, that mannerism and stuff. And we get a little bit of that in the novel, but not a lot. He's basically a monster. in the novel.
Mm-hmm.
He may be a count, but when we first meet him, he's like 80s, 90s looking. He's this old creature, essentially, that Harker meets in Transylvania. He naturally rejuvenates as he has more blood, but I think the one element that they tapped into that's just kind of hinted at the novel that's a lot better, it starts with Lugosi and goes through all the things, is Dracula can be a sexy dude and he can really get the women. These vampires are sexy and they can get the women. They're not monsters, so to speak. And I think that's the mythos of vampirism. That's what's kept it as a key monster throughout the decades, is it's a sexy monster. It's a monster that also is primal to us. And feeding off of us. Zombies feed off of us too, but they ain't so sexy.
The whole vampirism thing can be a metaphor for sexuality as well.
Definitely. Regardless of your sexual orientation, it is a sexualized creature. Zombies are not sexualized. They feed off of us too, but they're the darker, negative, awful side sort of thing. And they both rise from the dead sort of thing, just in their own ways. I just think that there's a charisma that has to go with the vampire character to make it what it is, but then you have to have the negative, darker, evil, awful, monstrous side in order for us to realize it's a monster.
Well, there's the hybrid too. I mean, we covered Salem's Lot back at Christmas, and I mean that's the combo zombie vampire or whatever, where they do stink of the grave and they are repulsive and not sexual at all. And that, I wonder how, it's weird. We've covered it. I felt like I was repeating myself earlier, and then I realized we've already done 2 versions of Nosferatu on this podcast too, which is essentially the same story.
Yeah.
When he goes to Dracula's castle and Dracula's really, really old. But I wonder what came first, the chicken or the egg. Did the sexy vampire come first, or did the repulsive vampire come first?
Well, if we go back to the novel, the whole beginning of it, he's repulsive. I mean, he brings in a baby at one point and eats the baby in front, throws the baby to the brides, and he's climbing down vertical walls.
Right.
And he's scary, and he's eating rats on the boat and everything else. And so he's a monster.
So the films brought the sex appeal in then.
Yes.
The play.
The play did, because we had to have a villain that could talk, that could interact with us. And he can't be this monster in every scene. So I think that's why they made him this elegant count.
That's where I was going. I was wondering where it evolved. And that makes sense if it evolved in the play, because it's a speaking role.
Correct. And we had to have him as a villain that way. And that gave him that kind of banter with Van Helsing back and forth and yada, yada, and Lugosi definitely made that more. And then the sexuality really came into play with Christopher Lee. I mean, and then Frank Langella, definitely.
Well, because then they could start showing breast, or at least the promise of them on screen. Mm-hmm.
Of course. But scene wise, I guess, let me check and see if I have anything I pulled out. Definitely, but I don't remember any. All of Renfield's I love. I even have in my notes, wow, Jonathan sounds a lot like Renfield. Oh, wait, that is Renfield. Okay, I get it now.
Right. He's the real estate agent, which is what I think the IMDb notes say. I think that's kind of funny. One of the scenes that sticks out to me, we've already talked about him getting out of the coffin, but the one that sticks out to me is what you were saying when Renfield first arrives at the castle and everything is covered in cobwebs and Dracula's on the staircase. He gives the whole creatures of the night spiel and then turns to go upstairs, saying for Renfield to follow him. And you basically see what is kind of an illusion where it looks like he walks through spider webs and they don't break. And Renfield notices that. And he's like, what the fuck? And because when he goes up there, he's having to use a cane to get through them because they're thick. nasty ass spider webs. But that whole scene on the staircase to me is very, very memorable.
I agree. I think, and I think it does set up that weirdness at the very beginning very well, because if you didn't catch it, you think about it again and go, wait, how did Count Dracula get by that big, gigantic freaking spider web that's in
right.
Of course, I was thrown off because I was taking a note about, I don't think Transylvania has armadillos. I'm sorry, but you cannot cut to a picture of a bunch of armadillos in a cage and in Transylvania.
Yeah, that was kind of strange. I read something about it on IMDb. I don't think I copied it, but it was something to do with armadillos feast on dead things or something. I can't remember.
Sure. Yeah. They're okay, great. But yeah.
Those are Hollywood armadillos.
Yeah, Hollywood dillas. Yep.
And then other scenes. That it seems like every movie has the scene where Harker or Renfield or whoever cuts his finger, and
yes, Dracula, that's from the novel.
Dracula gets all thirsty.
Yep. Because that's our first hint at the blood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't think the Horror of Dracula had it, but this one does have a ship scene where the ship comes to London. This one
is from the novel.
It is, and it's kind of fun. The scene where they open the hatch and find Renfield below, that looked up where he's all mad and crazy. That's a fun one as well.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
You had mentioned before the whole mirror in the cigar box scene. That's a good one, and that's a good tense scene between them.
It's kind of like his first one-on-one with Van Helsing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've got the note. That is such an odd ending, but honestly, with having watched these back to back, I can't remember the ending of 31. What was the very ending of 31?
God, I just watched it. Why can't I remember?
See, why have I blocked it?
He puts the stake in Dracula. It's off screen. You hear Dracula scream, and then all of a sudden, it's either Mina or Lucy. I can't remember which one they use. They always switch them in these movies.
Yeah, they do. That's true.
But she ends up no longer being a vampire because they kill Dracula, and she's okay. And she's in like Jonathan's arms.
Right. She doesn't.
I'm pretty sure that's how it ends.
Yeah.
Because it ends abruptly. I do remember going, oh, wow, that was a really fast ending.
Yeah, because the whole movie's only like an hour and 15 minutes. I mean,
it's not even that long, I don't think. It's like 70 minutes. It's like an hour and 10, maybe. Yeah.
And they do keep in the novel, it's a huge chase. He is going back to his castle, and once he gets back there, they'll never be able to stop him.
Well, and they're
racing him.
They have a cheat in this movie that's really bad. When Dracula leaves Van Helsing after the mirror scene, Harker runs over to the balcony and goes, "There's a dog running across the lawn."
Yeah.
And he's like, "That's not a dog, that's a wolf." And he's like, he's trying to outrun us or whatever. And it's like, yeah, all this off-screen action is really exciting.
Right. I've got security at this sanitarium really sucks too, because this guy keeps getting in.
Well, all right, let's go. All right, we'll move on to casting really quick since we're doing two of these. I did want to say that the movie Dracula, or not the movie, the play Dracula was on Broadway in 1927.
Wow.
And Bela Lugosi starred in 261 performances of it. So he had been playing this role for a while. Edward Van Sloan, who plays Van Helsing, and Herbert Bunston, who is Dr. Seward, also were in that production. I don't know if they were in all 261, but all three of those guys were lifted from the play and put in the movie. So when you hear about this shit happening now, it was happening back in 1931.
Yeah. Why
And
not
usually,
use the ones that have done it? Yeah.
right. Well, and usually it doesn't happen. That's what I guess the latest example that comes to mind is that movie, The Prom, with Meryl Streep, where they had a bunch of, young Broadway actors that made this hit play. And then all of a sudden they took it to Netflix and put Meryl Streep and a bunch of people in it that had nothing to do with the Broadway production.
Yep.
But Bela Lugosi, I mentioned that he worked as the negotiator. However, before he was cast, they did want Lon Chaney to do it. And Lon Chaney died. So he couldn't do it.
And that was Lon Chaney Sr., right?
Yes.
Not Lon Chaney
The
Jr.
Lon Chaney that played Phantom of the Opera and Hunchback of Notre Dame and silent movies was who they wanted to play Dracula in this talking version. Unfortunately, he died. His son, Lon Chaney Jr., did go on to play him later in some lesser versions, including one I watched called House of Dracula. But anyway, Lon Chaney never did play him. There was another person considered for the role after Chaney before Bela, so they were not, I guess, leaning heavily towards him immediately. Some guy named Ian Keith. I don't know who that is because it was 1931. However, other candidates mentioned were John Ray, Paul Muni, who I have heard of, Conrad Veidt, who played the creature in Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Yep.
And Chester Morris and William Courtney, who also I have no idea who these old folks are. The original choice apparently was Conrad Veidt, but he had returned to Europe, so they ended up casting Bela Lugosi. That's
I think it's Veidt. I think he pronounces it Veidt.
Is it Veidt? Veidt. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing.
I think it's
And he's also known for playing Major Strasser in Casablanca, but I associate him with the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And you know what? I keep finding other actors that were considered. This is funny. John Carradine was considered for this role, and like Lon Chaney Jr., he did go on to play him in lesser versions, or sequels. But there's no corroborating evidence that this is true. Only that he was a player at Universal at that time. Okay. So he also apparently turned down a makeup test for the monster in Frankenstein, which I think that's interesting too. So it's funny that John Carradine ended up being in a lot of these Universal horror movies, but never as the lead.
Right. He was always the good supporting character sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. Until sequels down the road. And then he did play Dracula. I forgot about that. Helen Chandler, who played Mina, she was not the original choice. There was someone else considered. Would you like to guess who that was?
I have no clue.
It is someone you would know. It's not one of those like I mentioned before.
Mary Pickford.
That's a good guess. No, it's Betty Davis, who also had a contract at Universal at the time. However, head Carl Lammel Jr. of Universal at the time didn't think highly of her sex appeal.
Okay.
That's kind of harsh.
He just didn't like her.
Didn't like those Betty Davis eyes.
Right.
I mentioned already that Edward Van Sloan, along with Herbert Bunston, both appeared in the play. And then the only other thing I have casting wise on this really old movie is Dwight Fry is fantastic in this movie. He plays crazy better than just about anybody at the time.
He's the Brad Dourif of his day. Yes.
Yeah, that's a very, very good comparison, I would say.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And but I also like him when at the beginning, when he is that Harker-esque kind of character and everything else. He's still very
he's very likable,
charismatic. Yes, very good. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, his response to Dracula in the beginning, before there's any danger that he's aware of, is almost comical at times.
Oh, yeah.
And very endearing. Yeah, I thought so too.
Yeah, great character. I mean, I've got in my notes that this must have been, I know this was at the height of the Depression and everything else, but it must have been a really scary year, because I've got, in 1931 alone, you had Dracula, Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and M, the serial killer movie.
Mhm.
All of those came out in 31. It must have been a scary year for America.
Well, it was the birth of, I mean, you could go back to a few others, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, or a few other foreign films, but it was the birth of horror in the United States, really.
I would agree.
I
think
with
this
Universal
was it.
in
Yep.
1931. Mhm.
Yep. Totally
And
agree.
and I think that's why a lot of these are iconic and still are. It's because, that was just a big year for horror in Hollywood. This movie obviously didn't win any awards. All the awards I have are for like DVD releases. However, it is on the 1001 movies you must see before you die list, which is rightly
Makes
so.
perfect sense. You must. Yeah,
Mhm.
it is.
Before we move on to keys, do you have? I have a little bit of trivia.
Yeah, go ahead.
Some of this, actually most of this, I copped from IMDb. The original release featured an epilogue with Edward Van Sloan talking to the audience about what they had just seen. I guess because they feared that it was going to disturb people because it was so scary. But they removed it, and it's lost. But later, Frankenstein copied it and did it as prologue. Remember? Because
Yep.
we did see this when we watched Frankenstein.
Yes.
And he is also in Frankenstein. You know what? I thought I had that in my casting notes. I guess I did not.
Right.
But Edward Van Sloan is also in Frankenstein. He's another doctor. He's one of the doctors that Dr. Frankenstein's colleagues with or whatever.
I think he's a very good Van Helsing. I think he does it very well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. He's kind of iconic in his own way as Van Helsing.
I think he gives him that gravitas and that, I know I'm a somewhat foreigner to you, but I know what I'm talking about. You've got to trust me, John, kind of thing. Yeah.
I didn't watch it again. I have watched it before, but I was curious. Have you ever seen the Spanish language version that they filmed on the same set?
I have not.
It's really good. It's
and
actually,
I really should.
Yeah, it's better in places. Very similar, just in Spanish and different actors. And it's usually on the DVD releases that you can buy now. The only other trivia thing I have is that the script features a scene that was not found in the film, where Van Helsing kills Lucy following her transformation into a vampire. Apparently, he brings John into the graveyard to prove the existence of vampires, and they witness Lucy walking into a mausoleum.
Yes, from the book, straight from the book.
And after consulting John, he pulls a parcel from his pocket, making clear his intentions to follow her in and destroy her. Apparently, they cut this. At this scene, they cut back to the scene where Dracula's abducting Mina, and they're not there. So for some reason, this film, the budget restraints, I guess, it never happened.
Well, it's curious because in the novel and also in later iterations, even the next one we're talking about, the killing Lucy cements the quest. I mean, that's when all of them are all in saying, yes, we're going to have to go and kill him.
Well, it's the proof of what's going on.
Oh, yeah. Her killing and her making the point, like in the novel, I keep imagining what would it have been like to read this in like 1898, where you've got this woman, are all these reports in the newspaper of some strange woman all in white who only appears at night, and she's stealing children, and then they're finding their bodies. That would be creepy as hell. It was great.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's going back to old, European folklore too, of, the mysterious woman, the Hansel and Gretel, all of that, that this mysterious witch woman is killing our children. That's why he put that in there for Lucy to do.
Well, and even the stuff that wasn't folklore, like body theft or stuff for like scientific research, the Frankenstein stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all of that. I mean, you said something really interesting I wanted to touch back on, which you said this was essentially the creation of horror on cinema in the United States. You know, Hammer was kind of like that for England. It was the resurgence of horror in England at the time, and America, actually, when it finally, you know, was distributed to America. So it's interesting that we've picked two that really were this resurgence of horror
in different capitals,
in different capitals,
different cities. Yeah, Los Angeles and London. I lost my train of thought. Oh, what I was trying to think as far as where was literature at the time, because it's like you had this universal horror iconic monsters. Then Hammer came along almost 30 years later, 25 years later, and did it all over again with the same monsters. But where was literature at the time? Because I think, you know, Matheson was writing by then, and he was modernizing stuff in the 50s and 60s. And
the same thing with Twilight Zone and Rod Serling
in 1960. Yeah. So, and that was just a couple of years after Dracula, Horror of Dracula. I'm just wondering, it's just interesting that Hammer chose to go the old-fashioned route instead of trying to be innovative and move even further forward.
Well, I think, you know, they rebooted the vampire myth. I think that was the thing. We had come from the late 50s where all the cinema was the bug-eyed monsters and the alien threat and the nuclear threat and all of that. And they said, okay, those scaries aren't happening anymore. What's a good scary we can go back to? What's the classic?
Yeah.
Let's go back to this creature that literally lives off of us.
And they reinvented it by bringing it into modern cinema with color and gore and what have you, sex.
Correct. They created the gothic horror again. You know, sort of
well,
thing.
You know what? Since we're already talking about it, maybe we'll just move on to this and then do keys for all of them together.
Yeah, that's smart. I think that's smart. That'll
okay.
work.
So, all right. Well, we're into now the second feature, which is Horror of Dracula, which came out in 1958. It's a London Hammer movie, just like what we did a few weeks ago with Quatermass. And lost my train of thought.
1958.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. It's called Horror of Dracula because Dracula was still popular in America. And back then we didn't have VCRs. So the movie Dracula from 1931 would still play in theaters occasionally. And Americans did not want their horror confused with this new Dracula coming from overseas. So it was released as Dracula in London, but over here in the States, it was released as a movie called Horror of Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
Same with Frankenstein. You know, that we had Frankenstein over here. They did their version called Curse of Frankenstein. It's so funny. They always had like the evil of, the curse of, horror of, or whatever, but then it would be the American Universal monster.
But I think it's a way of them being able to say, we're not telling that same story again.
And they don't. They totally take new liberties with this film, and it is totally different. And from the novel and from the theatrical version. In this one, basically, Harker goes to the castle. We think, you know, that it's an amicable meeting, and then we learn that Harker's actually there to kill Dracula.
Great twist. Great twist.
So what about, we talked about my first time seeing the 1931 version. When was your first time seeing this one?
I remember seeing, I think I cannot remember, but I
know you didn't see it in a theater.
I think I saw this in a theater, but in a re-release in like late 60s, early 70s at the Princess Theater in Morristown.
Nice.
But I can't remember, because when I sat down to start watching this, I was going, oh, yeah, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing. This is going to have those scenes I remember that I love that actually have scarred me. And I wanted to ask you about them. And that's why I'm segueing into this. Because cool. I still remember them so much, and they're so vivid, and they scared the crap out of me. And to me, they are the horror, the Hammer horror, especially with vampires. And first of all, Hammer always had great brides. They always had very buxom, in white, with lots of bloody teeth women, which was great. And as a child, I loved that. But sitting down and watching this opening scene and listening to that music, which I immediately remembered that music, I was going, okay, I've heard that in a theater. That dun, 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 dun. It was such cool. Anyway, I started thinking, okay, so this is going to, I'm pretty sure I'm right. This is going to be the one where Van Helsing gets bitten and has to like scald himself with holy water and a burning poker in order to like cauterize the vampirism. And I think Dracula dies at a windmill. I cannot wait. I got to the end of this movie and went, well, that wasn't the movie I was thinking.
And in all honesty, I know what you're talking about, but I couldn't tell you which film it is because they did so many.
Had to look it up. It is literally the sequel to this movie, and it was called Brides of Dracula.
Oh, I have that.
All three of those moments worked for me. It's Peter Cushing again. But it is not Christopher Lee. It's a different vampire. But it is genuinely, from what I remember, it scared the crap out of me. And literally, at one point, he fights Van Helsing and he bites him. And Van Helsing wakes up and realizes, oh my God, I'm going to turn into a vampire at night. And so he takes this brazier and he puts this wrought iron into the brazier and he takes all this holy water. He pours it on himself and immediately starts smoking. He takes this brand and goes,
I remember that.
Holding on to a chain the whole time. And then, so that gets, his bites disappear. They don't turn into a burned bruise. They just fade away.
Because it's the power of Christ.
The power of Christ compels him. Yes. Yeah. Anyway, and at the very end, when the villagers are all confronting Dracula, they move a windmill into the shape of a cross so that the shadow of it is what kills him.
I remember that so well.
Anyway, I say that to say, no, that's not in this movie. No. This movie, however, is, but I do remember seeing it in a theater. So I'm pretty sure I saw it in a theater, probably in some re-release that the Princess did on a matinee sometime, because I loved the Christopher Lee characterization. He only has like 3 freaking lines in this whole movie.
I think there's 15. I think I've got that in my notes somewhere. It's very little.
But he is so iconic.
16. 7 minutes screen time, 16 lines.
So iconic, from the contact lenses to the way he can immediately switch from this debonair sort of thing to this literal creature with fangs and blood and everything. It was great.
I love his cape. It's always floor length and like covers his entire body.
Oh yeah. And moves.
And when he's going up the stairs, it's almost like he's floating up the stairs.
Yes. It's a very great way of doing it so that it almost flows with him, sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah, Doctor Strange took a lot from him for the cape.
For sure.
In my keys.
Talking about Christopher Lee playing Dracula, I mean, he's iconic. He's every bit as iconic as Bela Lugosi is, and actually did it probably more than Bela Lugosi. He was a little perturbed with their changes in the script and wanted to do the original novel, and it never happened. He did do several sequels. And then he got with a Spanish director, and I don't have this in my notes, but you can look it up. There's a movie called Count Dracula from 1970 that is a Spanish film that he agreed to don the cape another time because this director said he was going to do something more similar to the original novel. And I watched it a couple of years ago. It's okay. I mean, it's not earth-shattering, but it is a more faithful adaptation, and it is Christopher Lee as Dracula in the story version of Dracula.
I do think it would be interesting to debate, and I love you guys out there watching or listening to let us know, but in my humble opinion, I think Coppola's version is probably the closest to the novel.
Probably.
Yeah, I think each of them take elements and just kind of twist them to their own. Like I've said, I love the fact of making Harker and Van Helsing, vampire hunters from the very beginning. We know who this guy is, and we're not going there to sell him real estate to come to London. We're going there to kill him. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And introduce. They don't. I keep saying introduce. They don't introduce the brides. The brides are actually in the novel, but they sexualize the brides in a really overt way, and they carry that on in all the sequels that Hammer did, of course, because they have to have the the buxom heroines sort of thing.
And what's funny is that the first one he comes across in this movie, it's like, are you here to save me? Are you going to help me? Or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And then the bitch tries to bite him. I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
So I'm not going to save your ass.
It's perfect though. Works so good. Yes. Don't trust them. She may seem like she's nice and sweet, but she's not.
Right. It's funny. This movie was released on a double bill with a movie called The Thing That Couldn't Die. And in my thoughts, I wrote iconic again, but in all caps, blood, ! Sex, ! Because it is all there. Not as sexually overt as something we would see nowadays, but there is definitely a sexual undercurrent in this film for sure, much more so than the other one.
Yes, I think this established for me these women are, whether they're hypnotized or not, they are willing to give themselves to this guy, to this vampire. And
it's like a harem.
And that whole thing is carried out through all the sequels, in the Lost Boys, Near Dark, all that stuff. These people, these victims who are willing to give themselves. They're not taken by him. They are, they offer themselves to him, sort of thing. A lot of times they'll comp out by saying, oh, he's hypnotizing them, but it's usually not. And you don't feel that in this one. When Mina is saying, get this away from me. I don't like to smell the garlic and everything. And open the window, please. She's not doing that because she's hot and doesn't like the garlic. And that scene where I think it's Mina in this version, but she's Mina Seward. She's his wife in this version.
I don't know. They love to mix everything up. It's hard to keep them straight.
Well, when she goes to Dracula and then when she comes home with the big fur coat on, she has that kind of post-bliss sort of look on her face. And Hammer does not shy away from that. They are definitely saying, oh, yeah, there was more than just a little necking going on.
We neglected to mention that Terrence Fisher directed this. He's a great Hammer director.
Oh, yeah.
He directed a movie we covered last year called The Devil Rides Out. Which is more of a satanic movie. But in this one, he actually told her, he said, I want you to come in this room and look like you've been shagging all night. And it's the best shag you've ever had. So
I did not know that, but
and then like perfect. She nailed it. She nailed it like that very next take.
Yes, she did.
Because she wasn't getting it. And he had to tell her, this is what you need to look like. So what you described is exactly what he wanted.
Exactly. Yes.
Before we move on to cast, are there any scenes you want to mention in this one other than the windmill one that doesn't exist?
The women one that doesn't exist. No, I love, I really liked the battle. Of course, I've always remembered that. I've always remembered Van Helsing holding up two candlesticks in the form of a cross. I've always remembered how Dracula disappears in this, or is killed in this, which is great.
They actually cut part of it because it was too gruesome, and it existed on a Japanese print that was really badly restored in some version, but I've never seen it. Something to do with red under mortician's wax and him scraping his face.
Okay.
But apparently I've never seen it, and the only version that exists is not really good quality.
Interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, the part I remember that you're talking about in his death is when like the sun hits his foot and his foot kind of melts, but he's still alive and he's kind of like writhing around on the floor. Yeah.
And like, trying to crawl under the table. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've always remembered that. And as a matter of fact, a big key for me is the the new Geddes version of Dracula that was out like 2 years ago, the 3-part BBC one.
Yeah, the one we covered on a bonus episode. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then that one has that kind of final scene at the table with the curtain and the burning and all of that, except it's another character, not the vampire character.
Right.
But I thought that I liked. I also think this movie should be known for the iconography of setting up this whole, it's time to go stake the girls now, or it's time to go stake. And one of the characters, whether it's the Texan or Harker or whatever, can't do it. Then Helsing has to do it. He goes over, kills. Of course, in my notes, I even have, dude, if it's a choice between the girl and the vampire, start with the vampire. Don't start with the girl.
Right.
But I also have in my notes, that is the loudest staking in the world. I mean, it sounds horribly loud and everything. But it's good. It works for me. And the fact that he, just the way they show Lee, the way Terrence frames Lee a lot. He goes back, he's not in the coffin, suddenly he looks up and his silhouette comes into the doorway. Mm-hmm. That's really,
although it did take him a really long time to open that trap door. They cut to it like twice and he's still doing it.
When he's running away into the house.
Yeah. I was like, it's almost as if he wants you to catch up with it.
This chain is so heavy.
Yeah. I mean, I just opened this trap door, but then you cut back to him later and he's still standing there holding it. Like, wait a minute. Two scenes that strike me. One is the first time you see Dracula with the fangs. And I had to go back and rewind it and watch it twice. But it's when the woman, I guess, that wants to be rescued decides she's going to bite Harker. And Dracula, it's just an immediate cut to Christopher Lee's face, snarling with those eyes. And I was like, where did he come from? But if you back it up, you can see him coming into the doorway in the frame before that. It's just such a fast cut that it's barely noticeable. It's almost like he's just there, full frame, instantly, red eyes and fangs.
It's a jump cut and he's right there. And that is the Christopher Lee shot of Dracula with the blood red eyes and the bleeding fangs and everything. I was having dinner.
Yeah. It was a very Sigourney Weaver moment. Get away from him, you bitch.
Yes. Yeah.
Basically. Yeah. And then the other scene is something that you mentioned that I always remembered. And there was a little bit of a controversy, and not a controversy so much, but a little bit of a reluctance in casting Peter Cushing because everyone wanted Van Helsing to be an old man like he was in the first Dracula. And they were going to have Lee. At one point, they wanted Cushing to play him as an old man. And he said, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to play him as I am right now. And I'm glad they did because he's the same age and stature of Christopher Lee, and they made very good opponents that way. It would have been unbalanced had he been older, which brings me to the second scene that I remember, which is him jumping up on that table and running down that table toward those curtains.
Yes.
And yanking those curtains down. I love that scene. I mean, I do too. I win. I am Van Helsing.
Yes.
It's great.
Well, and it plays him. He's not just the old teacher who's there to stake when they're in a coffin. He's actually an action hero kind of thing.
He's an action
Jones. Van Helsing. And I agree. I totally agree with you. And I love Peter Cushing. I just loved watching him again. I love his accent. I love his inflection, the way he does stuff. He has, to me, a key that I have with Peter Cushing is always Roddy McDowall. They have this kind of way of being so endearing in their performances, but also they can be kind of scary at times and menacing. They can be intense and menacing, but there's such a warmth underneath, especially when he's dealing with women or he's talking to her about, it'll be all right, Miss Mina, we'll take care of you. And he's so charming and nice. And then it's like, we're going to have to stake her later, sort of thing.
Or he's the sad man that gets no Valentines on Valentine's Day and then comes back as a zombie in a Tales of the Crypt movie.
There you go. Yeah.
Or is it Volta Horror? I can't remember. It's one of those. Okay. I guess we could move on to casting as far as this one.
Oh, wait, one last one
sure.
I had. I think this is because I don't think I remember in the 31, this is the first time we see crosses being used as weapons, which is a very Salem's Lot sort of key later on. But, burning the forehead, and it actually leaves the burn on it, and Mina holding it, and it burns her hand, and that's how he knows, oh, she's been bitten, sort of thing, before he even sees the bites. I think this was the first time that iconography was created, and that goes through decades of movies from here
Still
on
does.
out.
Yeah.
Remember, I mean, you just meant what's the one with Chris Sarandon, Next Door, Roddy McDowell plays Van Helsing, Fright Night. You remember they get Evil Ed on the forehead, just like the girl.
Yeah, they sure do.
And burn the cross into him.
Yeah.
Because he's like the Renfield character.
Right. You reminded me of something. Oh, I know. You were saying that may have been when the cross stuff started happening in film, and it may have been. And I was thinking that it went through and lit until the mid 70s. And then Anne Rice came along with the interview and threw it out and said, no. Actually, he does love he likes crucifixes. He collects them.
Yes, I collect them. Yeah. I think they're very attractive.
Funny stuff. I forgot to mention the guys that wrote the original 1931. It was Hamilton Dean and John Balderston, and they adapted it from the play. However, the writer for this one is a man named
Jimmy
Sangster. And the reason I bring him up is that he did a lot of the big Hammer movies of that era, including Curse of Frankenstein. So he's the one putting his own spin onto these old tales that
and he basically, I think, said, okay, I got the title, I'm gonna do my own thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's make Christopher Lee look like a mummy with a blind eye and call him the monster.
And I think for credits, we do need to recognize James Bernard, who did the music. This music is really good in this. We talked about the lack of music in 31. This one does have a great theme and a great score through most of it. It's a little in your face, very dramatic, but so was a lot of Hammer. So you got to get used to that. And Jan Asher, who did all the cinematography for this, is a very Hammer cinematography. Hammer is very colorful. It is colorful photography. The reds are really red. The greens are really green.
That brings me to a question. What do you think of the opening with the castle? I mean, and then going down into the crypt and seeing Dracula's coffin and the plate on there that says Dracula, and then all of a sudden covered in dripping red blood, like paint.
Yeah, it was very Hammer to me. It reminded, I had like three keys instantly. I had the Love at First Bite. I had the one from Dark Shadows, the second movie, I think. And it just seemed, and it struck me, it was weird. I was going, okay, where'd the blood come? Dracula's not even in the, is he not in the coffin? Where's the blood? Why is it coming?
Yeah, I think it was just like, I don't know. It was like their theatrical, ta-da.
Oh, very.
Start the film.
But a lot of Hammer is like that. They hit you with those notes right at the very beginning, and it's gothic blood red.
I know, and I didn't mind the color of the blood. The first thing that goes through my head is that's bad blood. David will think that's bad blood.
It was bad blood.
The dead blood. But yes. What the color of the blood didn't bother me so much as I was like, where's that blood coming from, man?
Where's it coming from?
It's casket.
I mean, I would have rather them gone ahead and done the shot and just have the hand come up and start to push it open.
Well, yeah, very, very, yeah.
But they had to do that. We're going to have blood in this, and we'll show you why.
Yeah,
right there.
This is going to, if you want to stick around, this is what you're going to see.
This is what you're going to see. Yeah.
Funny. I don't have a ton of casting notes. We mentioned that Peter Cushing is in this film. Ironically, he is top billed and is only seen 25 minutes into the movie. So he's got top billing, and we don't even see him for almost half the movie. because this movie's pretty short too. I think
Yep.
it's like an hour and 20 minutes, maybe.
Hour 22, I think. Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
And then I also mentioned that Christopher Lee, who plays the Count himself, has only 7 minutes of screen time and 16 lines, and that's it.
Boy, he takes it. I mean, he so does.
Well,
to be this iconic with that little amount of time is pretty amazing.
And money, because he only got paid £750 to do it.
Jeez. Yeah, but he created his career. I mean, come on.
It did kind of lift him up there. I mean, he went on to just do all kinds of stuff. A lot of low budget B movies, but then as he got older, people like not Danny Elfman, what's his name? Tim Burton rediscovered him and brought him and Peter Cushing into the modern era with films like Edward Scissorhands and the Lord of the Rings movies. Peter Jackson also.
Yeah.
Too,
yeah. He was Saruman. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And he's in Star Wars. He's Count Dooku in Star Wars.
Right. And then lastly, I would like to mention that Brat Arthur Holmwood is played by Michael Gou.
Oh, yeah.
I love Michael Gou, or Go, however you say it. Gouga.
I think it's Go. But I remembered him instantly. As soon as I saw him, I said, oh, wait. What did I see him? He was Alfred.
He was
Batman.
Alfred in Tim Burton's Batman, another Hammer actor that Tim Burton resurrected.
Yeah.
But yeah, love Michael Gou. He is a fantastic actor, although he's kind of bitchy in this. I still like him. So there.
Yeah, it's so hard for them to portray that Harker-esque character, although in this one I think he's Seward, but or Holmwood. He's Holmwood.
He's Holmwood, Arthur Holmwood.
Who is Holmwood was the Texan character. I think I'm right. Correct me if I'm wrong out there, listeners, but I think that's the name of the Texas character from the novel, but he's not the Texas character in this. He's almost Seward. It's almost
But Mina and Lucy's last name is Holmwood in this too.
Right, which is wrong because that's just wrong. Her name should be Lucy Westerna is her real name. And Mina Holmwood, who becomes Mina Harker.
So what is with all this incestuous shit with the Stoker property? It's like, well, we're not going to do this, but we'll make him a real estate agent, but give him his last name and her first name.
It's because think about it. If you go back and reread that novel, it should not work as a novel because you don't know who the hero is all the way through.
It's epistolary, isn't it? It's told in letters.
Yes, it's told in letters and journals and newspaper articles and stuff like that. And so it's difficult to understand who you're supposed to be rooting for and whatever. And he gets a little repetitive because from what I remember in the research when I was looking for it literarily, he wrote it in sections too. It didn't come out as a novel. It came out as a serial. And then they novelized it, of course, afterwards. But so there was some kind of a little bit of confusion. We got these two women suddenly that we're supposed to like, but he needed one to be a victim and one to be the hero at the end or the heroine at the end. So that's why he put Lucy and Mina in it. But they have to have some kind of connection. So, let's make them socialites that are being wooed by all of these gentlemen. One of them being a sanitarium owner, which is where Renfield is, and also happens to be right beside
next door. Yeah.
Carfax Abbey, which is where Dracula lives.
Yeah.
The Texan, because we have to appeal to American audiences in our British novel. And then we'll bring Harker back. And I'll tie Harker in and make him the fiancé. So that'll tie it all the way back to the beginning of this guy that I just left in Transylvania 80 pages ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that kind of thing. It really doesn't work as a strong novel. So since then, everybody's just kind of been reinventing the wheel all the way through. They weren't I don't think as well plotted as like Anne Rice's have been and as the way she did hers. I mean, we definitely know Louis is the protagonist and Lestat is the antagonist in that first novel. We know
in the first novel.
Story.
Yeah, Lestat is not the lead in the first novel for sure.
Correct. And then she suddenly pours some more into Lestat. We change his character up, and now he's our protagonist, sort of thing. And But you don't get that in these novels. So everything gets very confusing. And I was the same way with you. I was going, Mina is that's Mina Harker? No, it's not Harker. It's Mina Homewood? No, it's Mina Seward? What's her name? I don't understand.
I just kind of go with it because I'm like, you know what? It is what it is. They're just changing things. I did the same with the first movie, the 31. I was like, well, this is more the play. And I have read the book. It's just been a while. So I don't know.
And one of them's going to die first. She's going to terrorize the town.
Yeah, there's usually two women. There's definitely a monster. There's definitely a Van Helsing, and sometimes a Renfield.
Sometimes a Renfield, yeah. Who will either give you a clue or not. We don't know.
Yeah. Usually he's eating spiders.
Yeah, usually he's eating spiders.
As far as awards, this movie was actually nominated for an award in 1959. The Hugo Awards. Our friends over in Science Fiction Land nominated it for Best Dramatic Presentation, including Terence Fisher, Jimmy Sangster, and Bram Stoker himself.
Okay.
It did not win, but it was nominated.
Right.
1959. But it is on the 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die by Stephen J. Schneider. So, folks, we're not kidding you with this double feature. Both these movies are on that list.
Yes.
So there is a reason why they are still regarded as classics.
Yeah. And I do think there's one misstep that Fisher made in this, and that was the whole funny gag with the carriages knocking down the toll gate. I didn't think that was necessary at all. That was kind of weird. And I know they're trying to do the chase because they're trying to get back to, he's getting back to his castle. But, and also that was kind of weird too. He's running back to his castle with Mina, but then he buries her in the front yard or tries to bury her in the
And
front
what is
yard.
that weird water spout that's out there too? I was like, what is that?
I don't know. The font of knowledge. I don't know.
He mentions crossing some water, and I'm like, did they just put that hose there because he mentioned crossing water? Why? That was weird to me.
Well, I think, honestly, I hadn't thought about it, but you just mentioned it. I believe in the novel, that's one of the mythos things in the novel. He can't cross running water.
Right.
But yet they're saying, oh, yeah, he actually has a moat around his castle and he crosses it all the time. So it doesn't matter.
Another thing that is this movie's plagued with a little bit that the first one is not is the arrival of darkness or the arrival of the sun. It happens really fast in some cases. It's like they look to the window and it gets dark as they're looking.
Yes.
Which is kind of a Salem's Lot thing, only a little faster.
Well, and did you, so I had a question as far as a segue to Keys.
Sure.
Do you think this movie had an influence on Dark Shadows?
Probably, because Shadows didn't come on until like 67. So it came out about 10 years prior.
Okay. It just seems, it reminds me of Dark Shadows. It has a lot of the Dark Shadows feel to it.
Yes. I would almost argue that the first movie has more Dark Shadows than this one.
Really?
Namely, yeah, because of the relationship with Renfield and Dracula. Yes, because you had the relationship of Willie and Barnabas. In Barnabas's reveal in the soap opera, it's his hand coming out of the casket, just like it does with the Bela Lugosi in Dracula. Okay. And then you also have Willie wanting to be, I can't remember if Willie wants to be immortal, but he definitely is Barnabas's slave, and Renfield is pretty much Dracula's slave in
Makes
Dracula.
Sense.
So yeah, I would say there's more relation to Dark Shadows in the first one, but I did have it as a key, obviously.
I did too. Yeah, obviously. What other keys did you have? I mean, other than the thousands of
that's what every vampire movie ever made.
Ever made.
Yes. Let's see. I'm going to go back to my first notes. We were just talking about Dwight Frye, and I mentioned this when we did the Frankenstein coverage a few seasons back. But the Alice Cooper song, Ballad of Dwight Fry, it's one of my favorite Alice Cooper songs. And it's obviously an homage to the actor that played Renfield. And then, of course, I have the novel. I mean, because we wouldn't have it if we didn't have the novel. Countless future vampire films, Anne Rice, Dark Shadows, Count Chocula, Sesame Street. I just added Sesame Street because of you. So there's a few. You go.
I've got countless vampire novels as well as countless comedies. This icon became such an icon and a parody icon of whether it's The Widow's Peak, which he doesn't have, by the way, but everybody used to give him one.
Well, Bella's got longer as the movies progress.
Right.
Yeah.
But the black cape, the accent, but I've also got Frankenstein, just because it came out the same year. It looks very similar. They pair very well together from a cinematography standpoint, both Dracula and Frankenstein.
Bela would not like you for saying that, but that's okay.
Yeah.
He had a big rivalry with Karloff because I think Karloff was more successful.
I've got American Werewolf in London just because of the whole scene about you open up the door and everybody in the bar stops and looks at you, which is in essentially both of these movies.
And in The Invisible Man, too.
Yes. And I've got Invisible Man. Yes. I've got The Frightened Villagers. You have to have The Frightened Villagers, which is a huge cliche that develops from these movies. I've got Love at First Bite. Do you remember that comedy?
I do. And I put it down when you mentioned it earlier. I had assumed that's what you meant by comedies. Is there another?
Well, Young Frankenstein also has that feel to it. The same kind of Dracula inspired, sort of classic inspired monster. I've got Salem's Lot, but not just because it's a vampire story. It really hit me in the Hammer one because it was kind of like he said, I've left you a gift downstairs kind of thing. When Dracula has bitten Lucy and left her there. And it's very much like the whole Barker and or Straker
and Barlow.
And Barlow and the lead in Salem's Lot when he's kind of like, your girlfriend's downstairs.
That's
kind of
in the novel, though, not in the movie. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. I think Stephen King was severely influenced by these movies.
Oh, and he's readily admits it. He says Salem's Lot is Dracula meets Peyton Place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's all of my big ones. I mean, so many movies you could say take from the novel or take from these movies, but I think the elements of sexualizing a monster go through a lot of the late 60s and early 70s movie making. We've got to make a monster that's not just a creature like it was in the 50s. Now there's something to it, sort of thing.
One other I have that I would be remiss if I left out is Richard Matheson. Basically, I mean, he wrote a book called I Am Legend, which is one of my favorite novels. Been adapted 3 times, never well. And
never will.
Basically, to paraphrase him, when he wrote it, he said, "You know what? If one vampire's scary, what about a whole world of them?" So he wrote a book about the last man in a world of living in a world of vampires. One I caught from IMDb that I did not know, and I don't know that it makes any difference, but is that when they are traveling to London by boat in the 1931 version, that footage was lifted from a silent movie called The Stormbreaker in 1925. So that wasn't even original footage to the movie, which is odd, but not uncommon. I mean, they do it with music all the time too. Yeah. And you could tell. I mean, it was obviously he was not standing in the same set as that boat. It just was not happening. I've even got in my notes, where is he standing on this boat? Because it's rocking with all these waves and he's just
so calm and looking,
Right. And if you think that people are dying because they were in a storm, then why is he chained to the steering wheel of the boat?
Well, that's because that's from the novel.
Right.
And yeah, the captain does chain himself to the mast so that he can get them to London, so he can steer it to the, not the mast, the steering wheel, the whatever you call it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what you call that either. The big thing you turn. This is another one I lifted in the 1958 version. Apparently, when Harker meets Dracula, there's a statue in the background, and it's of Pazuzu, the demon from The Exorcist.
Exorcist.
Yeah.
I didn't catch that. But
I didn't catch it either, and I meant to look for it, and I forgot.
But there you go.
We also, I don't know how you would classify these, but both, I guess you could just say Lee and Cushing both ended up in Star Wars movies.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the Star Wars key in there a little bit. And then, of course, Christopher Lee and Michael Gou also ended up in Tim Burton movies. I thought that Peter Cushing did too. Did Peter Cushing? Peter Cushing is in Edward Scissorhands, isn't he?
No, that's Vincent Price.
You're right. It is Vincent Price. I forgot about
He's his
that.
daddy or creator. He's the scientist.
Creator. That's right. Okay. Yeah.
I wasn't going to correct you earlier. I was going to let fans do that, but that's okay.
I'm glad you did, because it's been a long time since I've seen that movie, and I kind of like Price in the same way that I like Cushing. They're both great.
Yeah, they were very similar, although Price did do Fives, which is just great. So we definitely need to put those on the list. Come on. We've got to
we'll get to it one day.
Rises again. No.
That's right. I'm glad we fixed that in this podcast episode, dear. You're right. So I guess Peter Cushing never did a Tim Burton movie. I thought he did.
I don't think he's done a Tim Burton. No, I don't know for sure, but I don't think he's done.
Well, if he did, I'll mention it again later. And then you've already mentioned Young Frankenstein, right?
Yes.
Because apparently the opening scene of Dracula's coffin without the blood was nodded to in Young Frankenstein.
Oh, okay. Then.
I think don't we see Dracula's name on a grave or something in Young Frankenstein? I think we do. It's been so long since I've seen that one.
Because they're making
that's
a joke
all I have as well. I mean, obviously we can't list every vampire movie, but my God.
No,
there's been a lot.
Hammer alone, there would be like a dozen, sort of
right.
thing. So,
and not all of them had Lee in them.
But it's this iconic version that has, inspired and influenced so much. Mm-hmm. Whether it is the classic in the gorgeously starched tuxedo with the strange European accent, or whether it is this creature that can turn at a dime and either seduce us and then take us. It's become this influence in so much culture, not just the United States. I mean, the world's culture sort of thing. I don't think it would still be as popular. We talked about it when we covered it. There's the definite difference between the vampire and the creature from the Black Lagoon, sort of thing, as far as mythos goes. So,
well, yeah, and Creature from the Black Lagoon was in South America, whereas all this other stuff was in like Eastern Europe, or at least London. I think Invisible Man was London, but Frankenstein.
But you've got a character that's
in Eastern Europe, I think.
Right, and you've got a character that every 2 decades or so is resurrected in some way, whether it's Hammer bringing it back, or Anne Rice bringing it back, or the late 80s, early 90s bringing it back with a more visceral, Lost Boys, Near Dark, more contemporary look. And then going back to the classics again, and we're redoing it with Mike Gaddis and BBC, or we're reinventing it again. on as a movie version or a franchise.
Well, you mentioned something about Dark Universal when we did Invisible Man, and you said they were redoing them too.
Yeah, that they're thinking about redoing all the classics. They've done Mummy, and they're thinking about Creature, and then they're going to do Dracula.
Well, and they did Wolfman a while back.
Yep, they did Wolfman. Yep.
Interesting. They'll never get it right.
No, it'll be just like it'll be just like Tim Matheson's story. You never get it right. But we want to thank you guys for hopefully getting it right with us and listening to us do this every week. You can find us wherever. We're on the website. We're on your podcast viewing of choice. And we also have that YouTube channel. And you can go back and watch any of our past episodes. So some of the YouTubes are just audio only, right, Tim, because they don't have the video?
Yeah, I was looking at that yesterday. I think we started video with Looper.
Okay. All right.
Which was second season or third?
Second season.
Or
beginning
third,
of, it's like but the podcast goes back 3 seasons, and you can look up stuff. If you like what we're talking about and would like to hear a little bit more, we do have a Patreon channel too, and we do have 2 alternative sort of podcasts. We do the Dilithium Chamber, which is about classic Star Trek, and the X-Files Declassified, which is about X-Files, another great series that Tim and I both like a lot and talk about. And we would love for you to be a Patreon. We also have a lot of bonus material on there. We cover other movies, more modern movies, a mini series that's out. We recently did, ironically, we did not mention it during this podcast, but Midnight Mass.
Right. Well,
which is a brilliant take on the vampire.
And we covered the Dracula thing that BBC did too on a bonus episode. That's on Patreon as well.
Yeah, but in our keys just now, we never mentioned Midnight Mass, even though it's a huge vampire.
Yeah, Midnight Mass would definitely be a key.
But we want to thank you, Tim. I thank you. Next week, we'll be still in this fang-tastic world.
Yeah, if you guys are curious, we're doing the Frank Langella version from 1979 called Dracula, as well as Bram Stoker's Dracula that Coppola did in 1992.
With Anthony Hopkins. Oh, yes.
Yeah, and I noticed that it's no longer called Bram Stoker's Dracula. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, they just call it Dracula now, right?
Yeah. Why did they do that?
I don't know. We'll have to find out in our research for next week.
Maybe so. All right.
Tim,
I look forward to it.
Yep, me too.
All right. We'll talk to you later.
Sleep well.
Sleep well. Bye.
Can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.